This is the Armchair Science Podcast with Me and Zokya Media. Welcome everyone to the Armchair Science Podcast. I'm Me.
And I'm Zokya Media.
We're recording live on Twitch here on this fine Sunday. We've got some interesting things to talk about. Today, we're going all about science, technology, news. February was a crowded month, and we actually aren't even really going to touch on everything that happened in science and technology, but some maybe a little more focus on some things that I don't know, that pique our interest. What do you want from me? Like, I can't cover everything. Wish I could. But we got some interesting details, including some science breakthroughs. You're gonna want to key in if you're interested in nuclear fusion, forest fires, COVID, which I know we're all beat to death on that one. Apple AirTags that are tracking you, which we already knew because that's the point. But the thing is this time it's other people tracking you who you maybe didn't want tracking you. And then lastly, we're going to talk about digital redlining, which is a term that I only heard just today. And if you're unfamiliar with the term redlining, well, just know that it's a little bit racist, or a lot of it racist. And sometimes issues of inequity transcend more than just the outcomes and they were originally intended to do. Even if they are old, even if they are historic, they still affect things. And we're going to talk about all those things today. But for starters, something that I feel like is actually a very significant advancement in science, if not arguably one of the most ambitious pipe dreams of the science world, at least of the physics world, of the energy world, and that is nuclear fusion. So we're going to start off today's video by playing, we're going to start off today's podcast by playing a short video.
The world's largest
wheel the little
fusion
squeaky
machine has set a
AV
world
cart
record
into
for
the classroom.
fusion energy
Oh, sorry,
production.
you played it.
We
I didn't
talked to
realize.
one of the scientists working on this project to learn about how it was achieved, how it compares to other fusion projects around the world, and what it might mean for the future of fusion energy. The dream of an earthly energy source as clean and efficient as the reactions powering our sun has lived in the minds of researchers for decades.
In order to achieve fusion reactions, so we're fusing together light nuclei, this is deuterium and tritium in this case, these are just hydrogen isotopes. We need to bring the deuterium and the tritium to very high temperatures and very high pressures.
All right, so nuclear fusion. Zokya, if we're just going to give like a little bit of background of just our knowledge on this, there's two different types of nuclear reactions. You have your fission reactions and you have your fusion reactions. And fusion, as the names might imply, fission means to break apart. Fusion means to put together. When we're talking about nuclear physics, when we're talking about what it means with fission, you are physically breaking apart an atom. You are splitting it apart. That's a little more common. Well, not the little more common, it's the lot of more common, but it's the one you're much more familiar with. You split an atom, you release a ton of energy. That's how you get nuclear bombs. It's how you get nuclear energy. Well, there's a little more to it than that, but the idea is that large, heavy, unstable atoms that are radioactive can be broken apart, and the released energy can then power our grid or cause devastation and destruction. By contrast, nuclear fusion is the opposite. Instead of taking heavier atoms and splitting them apart, you're actually taking much lighter atoms, in this case isotopes of hydrogen, tritium and deuterium, and you are smashing them together. It's a little more complex than that, and extracting energy that way. The advantage being clearly that number one is you're not having to deal with radioactive elements. There's clearly very problematic issues with radioactivity. If we're going to talk about nuclear disasters, Fukushima, Chernobyl, it's not exactly something that you can just clean up afterwards. It's something that lingers for thousands and thousands of years, the fallout of that. And anyone who's played a Fallout game knows exactly how destructive that can be. So anyways, more on the video.
We're talking over hundreds of millions of degrees Celsius. What we get is a plasma. It's an ionized gas.
Recently, a new breakthrough at the Joint European Torus, or JET for short, has brought this dream one step closer to reality.
So the JET tokamak is actually the biggest fusion machine that we have in the world right now. It's a tokamak. A tokamak is just a donut-shaped device in which we hold the plasma using magnetic fields. We managed to achieve very high fusion energy. It's a record fusion energy ever produced. We're talking about 59 megajoules. We did this by using the fuel of future fusion reactors, which is deuterium and tritium, what we actually want to have. In most other experimental plants, we are using just deuterium. So this was quite a unique thing. And of course, along the way doing this, we learned a lot about how the plasma itself behaves and how we can apply that knowledge to next fusion devices.
The record-breaking plasma lasted 5 seconds, which is significant for fusion in this stage of development. However, the record for longest sustained nuclear fusion was recently broken by a different fusion device, China's artificial sun, which sustained its plasma for 17 minutes. I asked Dr. Kapatu to explain the difference between these two fusion milestones.
The key difference between that is they don't use the deuterium-tritium fuel mixture. Currently, JET is the only machine that can do deuterium and tritium together, which is the fuel mix we're going to use in any future fusion power plant. And of course, they don't reach the high temperatures that this kind of plasmas we run here. But of course, as you understand, for fusion research, everything has to go together. So we want also the duration, we want also the higher fusion power. So all of this combines at the end towards the common goal.
Despite the frighteningly high temperatures and memories of Dr. Otto Octavius's disastrous, albeit fictional,
I love the reference to the Spider-Man
attempt at containing a fusion reaction with robot arms, Dr. Kapatu tells me
that's
that
why
fusion
everyone's
of this
against
sort is safe, clean, and sustainable.
We get deuterium from seawater, tritium, the future fusion power plant will be able to breed itself. We don't have any CO2, of course not. We don't have any long-lived radioactive elements remaining that we need to take care of. If something doesn't work,
it looks so amazing on
itself.
that camera view.
While breaking records is
plasma
always
just
exciting,
swirling around that
there's
chamber.
still a long way to go before fusion starts supplying energy to power grids.
JET is an experiment. JET was never meant to produce fusion energy in the terms of making it to electricity. Then we proceed to ITER, the machine being built in southern France, which is much bigger. We'll get into much higher fusion power, up to 500 megawatts. And for longer, we're talking about up to 1 hour. But ITER is still an experimental reactor. So then we are designing the demo. Demo is a demonstration fusion power plant. So this is actually going to show that we can produce electricity to fit to the grid.
While the road to fusion power might be long, it's illuminated by exciting milestones like the recent record broken by JET.
We're happy to announce results like this that show that we are on the right path.
As always, thanks so much for watching. I'm your host, Jesse Orrell. See you next time. What the fam?
Yeah, so that video is from CNET. Giving credit to them. So nuclear fusion, like, why is it so important? Obviously, it's cleaner, uses things that don't require massive amounts of, having to get these heavy metallic elements out of the earth and the problematic nature of their existence. This uses isotopes of hydrogen, which are, like they were saying in the video, more or less naturally occurring. I guess the other ones are naturally occurring as well, but far more sustainable, far less problematic in terms of the use. Not that tritium and deuterium are, entirely, non-problematic, but substantially less than that of, heavy uranium or anything worse. So you might also wonder, like, okay, so what's the, okay, that's cool and all for the environmental aspect, but what else? Well, the other part is that, if we're going to get into space, and when I say space, I'm not talking within our own solar system. I'm talking space as in interstellar travel, maybe even intergalactic travel. You're going to need sustainable energy that you can use for incredibly long durations that doesn't have the same problematic effect. And nuclear fusion is 100% that ability, because you're not always going to be able to just throw a bunch of solar panels on a spaceship and just send it off, or charge really, really, really big batteries. You're going to need a much better source. Nuclear fusion would be the answer. Now, you might go, well, why aren't these all over the place, anyway? Well, number one, that project is incredibly expensive. That second one that they referenced there at the very end, the larger one, it's something like the most expensive science experiment ever done. And that's just it. It's an experiment. And the net output of electricity, the net output of power is lower, is a negative. So you actually have to input more power currently than it would actually yield. So it's not yet truly realized. And a lot of the just, advancements like this are, that next step. Because I feel like if humanity is ever going to truly become an intergalactic species, we absolutely need fusion. And not only that, like, just think about the consequences, the ability to not have, just even for life here on Earth, not having to extract fossil fuels, not having to use coal, not having to use natural gas. The problems with solar panels, which aren't really that big of a deal with proper storage, would be entirely alleviated. We wouldn't have to have, because, it is sometimes cloudy or, nighttime. So the storage issue becomes significantly less of an issue overall. And I don't know. I don't know. It's like sci-fi, but it's real, right? It's they talk about
closer every day. It's great.
And it's like Star Wars, man. Like, they always talk about having reactors and stuff, and I would imagine those reactors probably were fusion reactors. I mean, if we're going to talk about the science of Star Wars, which is an episode we totally should do, by the way. Science of Star Wars. Like, we did Back to the Future, we did Ghostbusters. Why not do Star Wars? Other than we're going to have a ton of nerds, which myself included, coming out of the woodwork and yelling at us, because that's the cool thing to do if you're a Star Wars fan nowadays, is to hate everything. But I don't know. It would be I think it would be a good time. I think that would be a good one. Fusion. I'm really excited about this. I'm hoping, the current estimates are that this type of technology could be, actually like fruitful in another 30 to 40 years, at which time you and I will both be very old men. But
oh, that's a depressing thought. Thank you.
It's a little depressing that we don't get to see like the real cool future stuff. But who knows? Maybe if enough world governments throw enough money at it, and maybe if we get a little bit lucky, maybe we'll see it in another 20. You never know. So in the meantime, I guess we'll just have to continue relying on that the gravity confined fusion reactor that's 92 million miles away, aka the sun, because the sun is a giant fusion reactor. But that one doesn't have to worry about energy input because it's so massive that its containment is it's gravity. So
it's its own containment.
It has its own containment, and it doesn't work that well. And if we're going to talk about the safety of power generation in general, the sun is not a safe thing. Like, for the most part, I mean, if you think about it, there's the obvious stuff, like you can get sunburns, there's the risk of, skin cancers and that sort of thing. But then there's solar flares that can knock out world communications, like they actually did earlier this month too, which isn't a segue into our next thing or anything, though it probably should have been. But, all these like Starlink satellites that got taken down by a solar flare. And now there's a bunch of extra space junk, which, they're not the only things that were affected. Solar flares impact satellites all the time.
Didn't those burn up, though? Or did they not?
Which ones? The Starlink ones?
The Starlink ones, yeah.
No, I think they're floating around still. I could be wrong, though. But it's, that's drop in the bucket compared to the the amount of stuff that's just out in space that's just floating around for stuff to crash into. But yeah, now the sun, on the other hand, does impact into our next story, which is the fact that the Southwest currently, which is both where Zokya and I both lives in the Southwest, is experiencing its worst drought in over 1,200 years. So for years, scientists have been really watching the trend towards mega drought, as it was referenced in this CNET article, in the American West. Mega drought sounds freaking terrifying. But it's in the Southwest, it's actually been the worst drought since medieval times. And despite like heavy precipitation that we had in some parts like last year, it's been brutally dry overall in the western United States and as a whole. And it's estimated that that 42% of the current mega drought in the Southwest can be attributed to human-caused climate change, which kind of once again segues back to that previous story about fusion. It's like fossil fuels, they put greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, they warm up the earth, and the places that were already fairly vulnerable are becoming more vulnerable. So in late September, before what seemed like a pretty good run of precipitation, 99% of the region was experiencing some level of abnormal dryness or drought, according to the U.S. Drought Monitor. And intense heat and dryness in recent years has been helping fuel wildfires that have wreaked havoc. You might have probably heard about the ones in California or Zokya. You actually were fairly close to some fires where you live.
About 5 miles away. You know, you could see the smoke, and now almost every year now there's an event like that. It's no good.
It's not good at all. In fact, I've a little personal anecdote. The guy who I went to go train with today. So I was out running with a guy that I work with. There was actually a fire that started because of his neighbor was doing some welding or something, and some sparks got in the grass and it burned up onto his property. So the fire department was out there yesterday, just spraying water all around like buildings and stuff, trying to protect him. They did get it under control and it didn't become an issue. Here where I'm at in, the Panhandle, Texas, we have not a lot of fuel to burn, but we just have a lot of dry grass. So when it goes fast. And it can be devastating, especially when there's a lot of livestock in the area, when there's just homes, like things get burnt. That's not good. Things being on fire around you is generally regarded as being a terrible consequence. And
so much so it's a meme.
Yeah, and these forest fires happening more and more often, drier temperatures, or not drier temperatures, drier conditions, higher temperatures, all leading to potentially disastrous consequences. And it's not even just about the dryness. It's not even just about the temperature. It's not about just the fire even. It's these outlier events that are happening in other places. They're becoming increasingly common and serving as kind of an exclamation point to the overall trend of peril in the West, and not just in the West, but everywhere else, where you've got temperatures soaring up to 120 degrees 120 degrees Fahrenheit in Canada last summer.
Oh my gosh.
It was like, come on now. Like in Canada, 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Absolutely insane. And the fact is that, we're dealing with an existential crisis that is the climate crisis. And unless, we get on the ball about doing stuff, the damage is only going to continue to get worse. And for anyone who might question, like, well, how do they know the temperature during medieval times? It's not exactly like they had, Noah or anything going on in the medieval times. And you would be correct. They didn't. Instead, they use ice sheet evidence, fossil data, even like evidence from like ocean sediment, and they can actually determine ambient temperature within a fair degree of error. And it's this is all the more important. If we want to be able to protect our planet, we only got one spaceship right now, and we're all floating around on it. And if we don't stop fucking it up, it's not just going to be disastrous for those who are marginalized. It's going to be disastrous for all of us. Which then moves on. Speaking of disasters, there's a little bit of a pandemic going on. Have you heard of this, Zokya? Have you heard of the COVID
pandemic?
Have you heard of the COVID pandemic? We're well into year 3 now, and here we are.
Year 3. I guess I didn't realize that, but you're right.
I remember. I don't mean to get overly political. We actually actively try to avoid that, but I do want to put. I had a colleague, an old colleague. I don't work with them anymore. Who made the claim, because their idea was that this whole COVID thing, this would have been in March or April of 2020, where they claimed that this was all because of the election, that this was made to make
Yes.
the previous incumbent look bad, and as soon as the election was over, that all of a sudden no one was going to care anymore. Well, here we are. Not only is the election over, but the guy won the election in November, took office in January, been in office for over a year, and guess what? It's still here. So F that guy. Good job. Good hypothesis. And like, I can understand why, at the very least you might think that it was getting blown out of proportion or something, but you know how every disaster movie seems to start with, scientists going, hey, like, we should be concerned about this, and then no one's concerned about it, and then disaster happens, surprise Pikachu face. Like, it's just so the real issue though is, like, we could talk about vaccines, we could talk about everything all day, we could talk about new infections, hospitalizations, but what I really want to focus on is some growing evidence, some growing data about the effects of long COVID. And you might be like, well, what's long COVID? Well, long COVID would just be an umbrella term for any new or returning health problems that emerge after a COVID-19 infection has ended. So after you are done being sick, the effects that linger on long after you've been sick. And some of the symptoms of long COVID are a little more on the cute side, right? Like prolonged loss of taste and smell, or fatigue, like things like that, where up to more debilitating issues like kidney issues or blood clots, impaired brain function. Like it's a thing. These long COVID symptoms that are occurring and are going to be an ongoing issue for likely the next several decades, when people are still dealing with them. And there's been some more data, and that COVID-19 vaccines actually reduce the risk of long COVID, not only just by lowering your chance of being infected in the first place, but according to a growing body of research, even breakthrough infections with the risk of symptoms that last for a month or more is lowered by roughly 50% in people who've had the primary 2 shots of mRNA vaccine, like the ones from Pfizer and Moderna. Now, a February report by the UK Health Security Agency corroborated that people who receive both doses are less likely than unvaccinated people to report dizziness, fatigue, persistent muscle pain, hair loss, shortness of breath, loss of sense of smell, and other symptoms in the short, medium, and long term. But the meta-analysis, complied with 15 global studies, also found that people who developed long COVID before vaccination, so meaning they got sick before vaccines were available or before they had the chance to get vaccinated, reported an improvement in symptoms after vaccination, either immediately or over several weeks. Some individuals did report a worsening in symptoms after vaccination, which is interesting. But researchers have hypothesized that the reason some people with long COVID report feeling much better after getting the vaccine is due to a, in their words, quote unquote, reset of their immune system. It's also possible that the vaccine is helping fight off lingering virus, though that's probably not the case for everyone. So, folks, and I've heard this more than once from other people. I've heard a construction worker who was working on the building that I work in, and he was talking with his colleagues and saying that, well, I already got sick. What's the point of me getting vaccinated if I already got it once? Guys, it's not like chickenpox, where you get it once and you're done. And even though that's not even clear cut that you get it once done, you've actually introduced a virus into your system with chickenpox that actually could have problems down the line as well. But that's besides the point.
Is that what leads to shingles, or
it is? Same virus. So but with this growing data that people who've actually gotten vaccines or boosters actually alleviating long COVID symptoms is interesting. Totally anecdotally, a person I know, who's related to me, I don't want to specify who, did get COVID despite the fact that they were vaccinated. and ended up getting the booster shot and actually reclaimed a good portion. They'd lost their taste and their smell to a large degree, and it was kind of like starting to come back. But after getting the booster, it got significantly back. Now, that might have just, like, it's an anecdote, and the plural of anecdote, as we've said before, is not data. But perhaps a little bit of something worth thinking about. We've said it on this channel, said it on this podcast 100 times. Please get vaccinated if you're not already. If you are vaccinated, get boosted. It's not a big deal. Protects you, protects the people around you. Because once again, like, I had a very mild case of COVID. Zokya is one of the lucky elite who hasn't gotten it yet. Please don't get it.
It feels very scary. Both Disaster Joe and I. I mean, as far as we know, it's conceivable we got it. But if the how much the vaccine kicked our butts is any indication, we would know. And it's right because everyone on my team at work has gotten it. Everyone that I've interacted with has essentially gotten it.
I did get it, but I was vaxxed and boosted. Now, I got the Omicron variant much more recently my infection was. And my symptoms were incredibly mild. Like, I felt a little icky when I got sick. I had a little bit of a cough, some congestion.
You only knew because you got tested then.
Yeah, I didn't.
Right?
I was feeling bad, and I went and got tested, which confirmed it. So I was feeling bad.
But you only knew you had COVID because you tested.
Right. It could have been honestly, if I hadn't known any better and hadn't gotten tested, I would have thought it was a cold. But that was because I was vaxxed and boosted. And I have other family members, which, once again, plural of anecdote is not data. I'll say it again. I have a relative of mine who was very staunchly opposed to getting the vaccine, period, and never did. They're considerably older than me. They went and caught COVID, ended up getting admitted to the hospital with blood O2 is like 80 or something. Like, it was really low blood oxygen. Ooh. And ended up getting hospitalized, stayed in there, got all the monoclonal antibodies, ended up developing blood clots in both lungs. Currently, they were rapidly approaching retirement age. They were a couple years out from being fully retired. Ended up having to take early retirement because now they are confined to a wheelchair. They can't move around barely on their own. They're on oxygen, and he can move around on his own, but he can't move around unassisted. He can't just get up and walk places. Can barely hold a conversation without having to get O2. The kicker is still refuses to get vaccinated, despite all that. And, after a lengthy hospital stay, after nearly dying, blood clots, and you might think to yourself, blood clot. Well, that's just like when I get a scab on my elbow, right?
Oh, no.
Not really. Let's put it this way. Imagine portions of your lungs. Your lungs have these, without getting too much, basically blood vessels that allow the air exchange. And if you get blood clots in them, they don't fucking work. And meaning you're not getting air into your body, meaning your body is choking on itself. It's suffocating on itself. And I don't really have any other way to describe that. And it's not like something that it just gets taken out and it gets better. It's not something that just heals itself. It's something that causes permanent damage, permanent loss of the ability to breathe. That's not good. So I don't know. I feel like anyone who's listening to a science podcast is probably already vaccinated. But folks, just a reminder, we're not done with this yet. Despite the fact that restrictions on masks, etc., are being alleviated all around the country, despite the fact that the cases are still very high.
It's wild to me.
Which is wild, and shout out to streamers like Homozygo, who's been a guest on this podcast before, who talk about that at length and is much more knowledgeable on the subject. And you should definitely go check them out if you have questions in regards to that. But overall, though, just please, folks, if you're not listening to the experts already, just go do it. It's not a big deal, and it's one of those things that, well, actually, it is a big deal. That's the thing. It's not a big deal for you to do a little part. It's a big deal, the consequences, because it's not just about you. It's about the people who either can't get vaccinated due to an underlying health issue. It's about the people who are already immune compromised because of some underlying health issue that they are at a extremely high risk of developing a bad outcome based on if they get infected. And I'll leave it at that. Speaking of things you don't want, Apple. Poor Apple. Poor Apple.
Got him.
We had it seems like we just talk so much shit about Apple. And I feel bad, but I don't feel bad at the same time. Apple AirTags. Last year, Apple unveiled its new AirTags. And if you don't know what an AirTag is, it's a tiny little device that's actually a little bit bigger than like a watch battery. Kind of looks like one. It's powered by one, by like a 20 CR2032 or whatever. And their purpose is to help you locate things. And there's been other devices on the market long before AirTags were around, but there's one key difference between them. So you had like GPS trackers, you had like the what were they called? They weren't called Nest. That's a thermostat. They were called
Nest is thermostat. Oh, they had tiles. Were they tiles?
Yep, tiles. Yep, they were tiles, which basically did the same thing. You could put them on your keys. You could put them in your wallet, that type of thing. And if you lost something, you could use an app to be able to track said object. Now, the problem is, well, let me just go ahead and read Apple's statement, because they released a statement last week about this. The company said that AirTag was designed to help locate their personal belonging, or help people locate their personal belongings, not to track people or another person's property. And we condemn in the strongest possible terms any malicious use of our products. Unwanted tracking has long been a societal problem, and we took this concern seriously in the design of AirTag. Sure. It's why the Find My network is built with privacy in mind, uses end-to-end encryption, and why we innovated with the first ever proactive system to alert you of unwanted tracking. We hope this starts an industry trend of others to also provide these sorts of proactive warnings in their products. I'm going to go ahead and say you were maybe concerned about it, but you weren't as concerned as you think so, because a lot of features being added in post to help deal with this issue. There's been an ongoing issue of people taking these AirTags and either planting them on another person, putting them in a person's belonging, and using them to either stalk them, using them to find out information about where they live, where they work, know their location without their knowledge. Now, the key thing that makes the tiles different from the Apple AirTag, and this is honestly their selling point, why they're so useful. Apple AirTags basically use the network function of other iPhones, other iPads, other Apple devices that have a network, and uses their network connection to transmit those locations in real time. And you might think to yourself, like, that's kind of useful. And it is, because how many people have iPhones in the United States? Tons of people. I mean, you get on a subway in New York, and there's a solid chance that of the however many 100 people on that train, that a solid third of them probably have an iPhone, which is useful if you left something on the subway. The problem with that is if someone is using it maliciously, which, in Apple's defense, anyone can abuse a tool. Anyone can use for example, even just our phones. Our phones is a technology we've been accustomed to carrying on us all the time. They have a camera, they have a microphone. They can absolutely be used for nefarious purposes on their own. So it's not really fair to just call out Apple in this regard. However, the difference is a phone has a pretty limited battery. It's something that's going to be a little more conspicuous to plant on somebody. Now, I've heard of GPS trackers used by like PIs and that type of thing, like on someone's vehicle, that sort of thing. But this can be slid into a pocket, sewn into clothing, thrown in a backpack, and very hard to detect. In fact, there was a video I watched of Linus Tech Tips, where what they did was they actually put, it was a fun video where on their channel, I think it's called Super Fun Time, where they literally took the AirTag and put it in his clothing, so that way they could tell when he was home, because they basically did a prank on him. Like that's like number one, probably a
Right.
violation of terms of service. Probably shouldn't be used, even if it is like for a totally playful way. But this is something that could easily be used. If we're talking about, you know, all the issues of like human trafficking, we're talking about issues of, you know, people who are stalkers, people who want to hurt you, people who want to plant something on you to find out where you live. This is a problem. Now, they've been adding some new features, some of which are useful, some of which are kind of laughable, in my opinion. Because we'll put it this way: how many times have you gone to a website that has like a warning on it? Not to call it any specific type of people,
Yeah.
but you know, there's a new warning when you set up your AirTag for the first time that basically gives a privacy warning during AirTag setup. Ignore, says the criminal. But they've been adding precision finding capabilities to alert recipients of possible unwanted tracking, which is a good feature. Here's the problem, though. One of the other ones, it displays an alert with a sound when the AirTag automatically emits a sound to alert anyone nearby of its presence when it's detected moving along someone else's iPad, iPhone, or iPod Touch. So, like, if you have an iPhone and someone planted an AirTag on you, the idea is that it's able to pick up that data that it's following that track, and it basically can give you an alert on your phone to tell you that you might be being tracked by an AirTag, which is useful if you have an iPhone. But if you don't have an iPhone or an iPad or something like that, that doesn't do anything for you. And I think I'm not sitting here to just like talk smack about Apple the entire time, or just that AirTags.
Can't we though? Can't we just do that?
I don't know. Apple, if you push an extra, 200 downloads on this podcast, or an extra 2,000, let's set the bar higher. An extra 2,000 downloads of this podcast on your platform, then maybe we'll stop talking shit. But until then, no, that's just kidding. We're not doing that. We're going to continue to talk shit. And maybe 2 million downloads and lots of money. Give us some of that. Anyways, we can be bought for a price, a substantially high price. The real issue with like this kind of technology, I see a lot of use and utility around the idea of having these AirTags. You put them in a belonging, a backpack, a purse, even like your wallet or something. And there's been numerous stories of people who've recovered lost things, things that people lose a lot that are valuable by using the AirTags. And I think that's a useful product. However, the fact that the utility, the added thing, that using the use of, essentially the network of iPhones that exist, its main selling point is also its main vulnerability, in that it's so ubiquitous and so precise that it can actually become a danger for somebody. So I don't know if this warrants some regulation. I don't know if this warrants something else, but I'm
Tough
just gonna...
question. This technology is gonna continue. This sort of thing is gonna continue to be an issue, right? It's not gonna go away.
Absolutely. And no, I actually think it's a cool technology. You got to do better, Apple. If people are getting hurt because of your technology, even though someone's using it maliciously, not using it the way they're intended, you can't just escape the fact that you created this. You need to moderate it. The same reason why we could hold Facebook accountable for the bad things that happen on their platform, or Twitter or whoever. You're still on the hook for it, and you just need to fix it, plain and simple. This is a good step in the right direction, the changes you've made, but clearly you've got some work to do. Which moves into speaking of work to do, our last story on here, and this one is just entitled Another Story from CNET, and it was an interesting kind of deep dive. This is a little more on the sociology and a little more on the civics side of things, but the broadband gap's dirty secret, redlining, still exists in digital form. So redlining, if you're not familiar with that term, you'll learn it here in just a second. So communities that couldn't get mortgage loans in the 1940s are the same areas without fast home internet service today. and there's not really an easy fix. So the gap in broadband, and I disagree with that. That's CNET's thing. There's no easy fix. I believe there actually is an easy fix. But the gap in broadband coverage in a poor neighborhood is effectively a digital form of redlining, a now banned practice that denied service based on race in the 1930s. Banks started developing maps to withhold loans for high risk, in their words, high risk, undesirable inhabitant types. Yikes. Who were almost always poor people, people of color, etc. And the redlining extended to a refusal to insure residents in low-income neighborhoods, denial of health care, and decisions not to build essential facilities like supermarkets. Now, the decades of redlining represent a form of systematic racism that has denied generations of people of color or just communities and their kinds of opportunities that many other Americans in more affluent, white predominantly areas get to enjoy. And it's happening with broadband service. Big providers, when deciding where to invest the money to upgrade their networks, often focus on wealthier parts of cities and shun low-income communities. Fiber connections are expensive, and ISPs are hesitant to expand unless they expect a return on their investment. As a result, poor communities often have no internet or are stuck with slow legacy networks that can't meet today's demands, even though they usually pay as much as their wealthier neighbors who have gigabit fiber connections. So digital redlining isn't illegal, since there aren't regulations that dictate where broadband providers build their networks, but those desirable areas are often affluent, predominantly white communities. Conversely, areas where the income is lower tend to be in Black and Hispanic neighborhoods, intrinsically tying this issue to race. Consumer advocates say it's because of those complexities that it's difficult to truly gauge the magnitude of the problem. No, it's not. It's incredibly easy. People who live in neighborhoods that have faced systematic hurdles to achieving pedagogy in society, thus have been held back in other ways, which then meant that they might have been poorer, that meant that they didn't have access to things, and that continues on in the digital realm. I used to work, and this isn't even just like if we're talking about in the urban setting, but also in the rural setting. I used to work for an ISP. I used to climb the telephone pole. I used to physically hook up the wire at your house and run it out to the street, and then get it in, install the modem, do all that type of thing. That was my job. I would see very often that all the areas that got new fiber were in either brand new neighborhoods or neighborhoods that were much more upper class, that were large houses, big houses, that were kind of close together, big suburbs, even houses in rural areas, which I can understand the capitalist side of that there's less customers, therefore you have less people who buy your service. But it still doesn't change the fact that the access has been denied. And here's the solution. They say it's not an easy solution, and I disagree with you. It is an easy solution. We regulate broadband providers. Make them do it. The same things were done. You might go, well, that's not fair. That's communism. Well, guess what? We already did it once. With the New Deal and with other things back in the, if we're talking in the issues after the 40s, telephone infrastructure was not widely available and not available to everyone because they physically had to run wires to places. The government passed laws that made companies provide phone service to those places. The companies themselves got turned into public utilities, where just like with power or anything else, where we're, so fortunate to enjoy in the United States that most homes have power, most homes have phone service, they now could expand the same type of public policy to allow that and make it so that a infrastructure decision is not based solely upon return on investment, and is rather something that we recognize is a utility, something that everyone needs, something that everyone could benefit from, and making it so that it's not just those who have who to continue having. This way we can make it so that there's more people who can work from home, more people who can create content, more people who can do the things that we do online, which is just about everything nowadays. And the solution, once again, disagreeing with this article, the solution is very easy. You make them fucking do it. Anyways, folks, this has been the Armchair Science Podcast. Thank you for listening to the Armchair Science Podcast with El Taco Meat and Zokya Media. Theme music is Whispers by CRM Losi.